Hello, Peter.
Hi, James. Welcome back.
Yeah, thank you. Finally, I'm the one who's welcomed back.
And ironically, we're in your place.
Yeah. Yeah, a new setting. Hopefully it's not too echoey or anything, but it should be chilled.
Cool.
Yeah, so podcast episode number 8.
Yeah.
0 to 1 is the book we're looking at.
Yeah.
I always want to just, because of the way that the cover page is, I always want to be like, it's just 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel, but it's actually Peter Thiel and Blake Masters. So
With Blake Masters.
with him. I think the story was something like Blake Masters was like his student,
Yes,
and then
correct.
Peter was teaching the course, and then Blake was taking some notes, and then
He made a good summary of the notes and was distributing them, I think.
Exactly,
to some
yeah.
extent,
and then him and Thiel, I don't know if he approached Thiel. I think he approached Thiel or something like that, and then they ended up
putting together the book.
Yeah. So cool. Okay, so let's give a summary. I don't know if you want to give a summary or if you want.
Go for it.
Okay. So, 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel and Blake Masters is a book that is about exactly that, going from 0 to 1, specifically going from something not existing to one existing. There's a quote, doing what we already know how to do takes the world from 1 to n, adding more of something familiar. But every time we create something new, we go from 0 to 1. So while most get lost in incremental improvement, Thiel focuses on creating the completely new. 0 to 1 is about how to build companies that create new things. The book looks at how monopolies and competitions compare and aims to show that monopolies are where the real value lies, both for companies and for end consumers. This is because while competition results in incremental improvement, again, that one to n idea, creating something completely new, like monopolies do, is far more valuable. Competition leads to a war mentality, where monopolies lead to an abundance mentality. Monopolies, in the good sense, exist because they create something so good others can't compete. And in doing so, monopolies are, and another quote, powerful engines for making the world better. So, yeah, the book is focused on that 0 to 1 idea, but it's also looking at monopolies and the good aspects of them, which, yeah.
I think we spoke about this the last time we're discussing the book. I think that was a week ago, and how we've been led to believe that monopolies are bad, but this book kind of sheds a different light to it. You know?
I think it's been very helpful in my thinking, and it's like shifted things quite a bit because often the books that we've read talk about that idea of incrementalism, Peter sort of attacks that idea a little bit. It's not. I don't think he's like completely against it. It's just like,
I don't think he attacks it. I would say that in the context of this book, he's kind of saying that, and again, this is around startups. It's that you'd rather do 0 to 1. I think your level of success is driven by the 0 to 1 idea.
Yeah.
But the 1 to n, as much as, like you're saying, he attacks the idea, I don't feel like he attacks the idea. He says, I believe that the 1 to n needs to be there for us to get better products at the end of the day. It's vital in some sense, but it's kind of saying if you want to create a startup that's very successful, you need to have that 0 to 1 idea.
Yeah.
Rather than a 1 to n. A 1 to n, then you'll be found with a lot of competition, and as he states, like competition, eventually leads to prices being going down. As a startup, that's not a place that a startup actually survives.
For consumers, you're like,
yes, but for the company, it's actually not the best position to be in. So I still believe that 1 to n is important. That's the whole premise of Atomic Habits, if we really think about it. That you need to do that incremental change. You doing nothing is not ideal. We'd rather do 0.1 every single day because that amounts to something better at the end of a period of time. So that still has its benefits, I mean, in terms of like self-improvement and other kind of thing. I still think it's important.
Yeah.
But but if you want to create something that stands out, on the other hand, then you need that 0 to 1. You need that breakthrough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you don't want to have to deal with the competition, but just focus on that business and focus on making that like amazing product or whatever it is, then standing out is the thing to do, and not getting pulled into that competition. Yeah.
And I mean, I think even later in the book, it kind of shows some of the things that people need to look out for. Because, for instance, people want to create something that appeals to everyone. But I think he kind of stresses the fact that you need to create a product that appeals to you need to choose a small market.
That's at the end of
then
the book.
you scale up from that.
We always want to go
massive, but it's like just kind of like, again, if I use your words, attacks the idea of going big. I mean, I think it's by nature. I think everyone wants to do it big, but you have to be like, okay. Again, like it says, it looks at I think what is it? The durability of the company. Like, where do you want the company to be in 10 years? That's more important than now. So you need to build up to what you feel your company needs to look like in 10 years' time.
No, he makes some really strong points. And I think it is a very good way of looking at how do you create a startup that actually lasts and doesn't fall into certain traps and things like that.
I mean, I've never thought of myself as an entrepreneur. I think this. It's like one of those things. I think I always joke, but maybe there's some truth to it. That I'm happy making other people rich, than starting my own thing. But I mean, there've been some ideas that I've had, and I'm like, I can see that, and that actually makes sense. And I mean, I think the one important, the crazy section, I don't know if you remember the book, it talks about interviewing a physicist. And the guy screams out, is like, I already know what you're going to ask. And I'm like, okay, like, I'm a fan of science, but I don't think I'm that hard-headed, But and just to dig further on how he talks about the recruitment process, it's companies need to know that you are the value and not them, of how when they're selling you to join a company, it's not about, you work with the best this and that, because, I mean, let's be honest, there are probably 5 other better companies in a different sense, but rather it should be like, okay, what value are you going to add to our company, and in turn, what value you might live with,
Okay, so we've spoken about a bunch of like little random pieces, given some what do you call them, tasters? Should we go through the chapters just like normal? I don't have the 3 points like highlight points.
No, we can like go through the different chapters. I think as best as we can.
So let's very briefly look at the 0 to 1 chapter, which I think we've already kind of touched on, so I won't dig into that too much, but just to read initial parts. So doing what we already know how to do takes us the world from 1 to n. So this is the same thing I said in the introduction. And adding, 1 to n, adding something more familiar, or basically adding more of something familiar. But every time we create something new, we go from 0 to 1. So that's the whole idea of the first chapter, and just sort of digging into that a bit. Not the first chapter, the preface. Or preface, depending how you say it. Okay, shall we go on to the challenge of the future? Okay, so I've got some little points that we can chat through, and then Okay, so to start off with, the chapter says here, whenever I interview someone for a job, I like to ask this question, what he later calls the contrarian question. What important truth do very few people agree with you on? So that's his like go-to interview question, because it kind of makes someone say, or makes you realize what the person is able to do in terms of thinking outside of the bounds of society and the way that people normally think. I've thought about the question before, but I don't have a good answer for him, so I wouldn't make his cut. Yeah. Do you have a?
No, I don't. But I think there was a point that he made, which is important. That to answer that question, you must have created. I think it's only from creation can you properly answer that. I don't know which part of the book, but he kind of says it in that sense. Or I'm paraphrasing, not exactly, in the sense that when you come up with an idea, only then can you interrogate that idea enough to the point where you can do other people agree with this idea or not. And in most cases, that idea has to be one that's against the norm. It goes against the grain. Like, for instance, he talks about how people attack the education system. Like, okay, good, but it's like, what have you created that's similar to, or that can be seen in the same light as the education system that then people, essentially the education system doesn't agree on? I don't know if I'm making...
I'm not fully following.
No, so it's you have to put forward something that questions people's thinking.
Yes, yeah.
And it has to be a new idea, right? So again, to agree with you, like, I don't think I have any brilliant ideas that I've thought of that I can pose forward that...
We actually both have brilliant ideas. We just don't want to reveal them,
our secrets. Yeah, so it's that, putting that forward, and then a bunch of people coming to be like, oh no, we don't agree with you on this, and that, but you still hold to it and kind of show them why that excel, or why that would excel.
Yeah. I mean, he gives his one, because in the chapter he talks a little bit about globalization and things like that, and how most people think that globalization is like the main thing in the future, and the expanding globalization is the important thing, and that. And then his contrarian idea is, he says here on page 8, my own answer to the contrarian question is that most people think of the future, that the future world will be defined by globalization, but the truth is that technology matters more. So he's big on technology, and the way that he defines technology is any new or better way of doing things. And I think later in the book he sort of fleshes out some of the ideas, not directly linking it to this, but sort of relating it to this, where he talks about how you can't... there's actually a little blurb here. So in a world of scarce resources, globalization without new technology is unsustainable. So if you have globalization, like basically more of things across the globe, I guess, and more connections to other people and all that kind of stuff, but you don't have technology, then you'll go towards the I think in the last chapter it's like that ebb and flow of, or even extinction, but
But again, so just going back to the point I was trying to put across, his idea opposes the mainstream thinking. So that's what I'm saying. To sort of answer that question, you need an idea that probably you can defend, right? That most people don't agree on. So in this case, like, almost everyone, or how he puts it, everyone's for globalization, yet he's like, no, technology is the better of the two
thing to pursue.
You see, so, and to him, and I mean, he kind of defines technology as 0 to 1, and I mean, he would obviously be for that, because this whole book is about that, and yet globalization is 1 to N. So it's
a good way of framing it. And there's the idea that he puts in this chapter as well, vertical progress versus horizontal progress. So it's just another way of framing it, where 1 to n is the idea of like expanding out horizontal progress, whereas 0 to 1
It's
is
like a
what
leap.
is like technology, where it's going up. It's a different. It's on a different axis. Yeah. So 1 to n copying things versus 0 to 1 new things.
Creation, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. What you said, creation. So then at the end of the chapter, he says something which, is helpful. So this book is about asking questions. It's about the questions you must ask and answer to succeed in the business of doing new things. What follows is not a manual or a record of knowledge, but an exercise in thinking, because that is what a startup has to do. They have to question received ideas and rethink businesses from scratch. And then he defines a startup as well a little bit earlier on as a small group of people bound together by a sense of mission that have to change the world for the better. The easiest explanation for this is negative. It's hard to develop new things in big organizations, and it's even harder to do it by yourself. So that doesn't really tie together very well. But I think his general idea there is just saying, if you're wanting to create new things and and have a startup, then you want to have a team of people that you're doing it with, because doing it alone is extremely difficult. And then he also challenges existing companies, because he says when you're in an organization, often what ends up happening is, as it grows bigger, gesturing that you are being productive and doing things is more valuable in terms of like career growth and things like that than actually doing valuable things. Which is just it's a funny thing that he groups under that startup thinking. And how do you approach going from 0 to 1? Don't fall into that category of being like pretending to be productive. Actually do things and try and figure things out and think about what you're doing, rather than just sort of following on. So that's that's the I think general idea of challenging the future. Cool. Should we go on to the next one?
Yep. Okay.
Party like it's 1999. I like the name of this chapter. So I don't know if you want to touch on this one, or if you want me to give a summary.
Go for it, and then.
So for this chapter, I actually confused the chapter in my mind with the later chapter, where he talks about there's like 4 different ways of thinking about the future. So basically there's optimism and pessimism, and then there's definite and indefinite, and we'll dig into those. But I thought this chapter touched on that, but it actually doesn't. But it kind of still falls into that sort of way of thinking about things, because it falls under the definite optimism category. Because Party Like It's 1999, he writes here, the 1990s, when no loss was too big to be described as an investment in an even bigger, brighter future. So the way that people thought at that time was that everything is doable and everything is gonna point towards a bright and better future. Whereas now we find ourselves in like a bit of a mishmash between different ways of thinking, but we often look at the world as sort of random and that. And this is kind of saying, don't get confused in terms of saying you're able to achieve absolutely everything, but also don't like lose yourself in the I can't achieve anything and I'll just have to accept things for the way that they are and take small steps forward. Because if you do fall into that camp, then you're not gonna sort of go for it and just sort of be like, okay, I can maybe actually make this thing work. And he's saying, try and have that frame of mind where you party like it's 1999. You just go for it, because that's when things happen. And a last comment on that is, often when he speaks about things like this, I think of Elon, because he's that, not that he does everything perfectly, but he's that kind of guy that really goes for it. And like the things that he's done almost shouldn't have worked out, but because he's just like absolutely relentlessly saying, we will get this right. And he gives unrealistic deadlines and things like that, but with those unrealistic deadlines, people
Things
actually
get done.
get things done. It takes a little bit longer sometimes, but he's sent rockets to the moon, he's built electric cars.
Yeah, no, just to add to that, in that first section, there's something I marked. It says, the first step to thinking clearly is to question what we think we know about the past. I think that's very important as well. You know, like you're saying, like doing things in 1999, people would just go for it, but it's like you need to actually critically think of what has happened before and be like, okay, we're doing this. And I think maybe that's why there was that boom then, because people were like, this has never been done before. Let's go for it. You know, they didn't ask a lot of what ifs. It's like, okay, it's not in the past. You know, let's go for it. You know, that's how I look at what partying like 1999 is.
And it's also not, I guess, looking at the past and being like, okay, well, this has been tried, and I guess it's not worthwhile.
It's more about this doesn't exist, you know.
So later in the chapter, on page 20, he goes through Silicon Valley's 4 big lessons from the dot-com crash, and how those 4 lessons guide the way that I guess most people think, including the way that Silicon Valley people think. And so he gives these 4 things, and the one is make incremental advances. So I think that's fairly obvious. It takes more steps towards doing things better. Then stay lean and flexible. So he says your lean is code for unplanned. And because planning is, as he puts it, it's arrogant and inflexible. But you'll see he comments on stuff just now. So yeah, making incremental advances, staying lean and flexible, improve on the competition. So don't try and create a new market prematurely, is what that sort of summarizes. And then focus on product, not sales. So basically build the best product you possibly can. And he says that these are the 4 big lessons that Silicon Valley learned from that dot-com crash. But then he says that, and this is something that caught me by surprise, which is quite cool. He says that these lessons have become dogma in the startup world. So basically, it's just like people religiously believe these 4 things. And I mean, if I reflect on myself and you were to say to me, we were reading a book and we came across these 4 things, I'd be like, yeah, I think all 4 of those things I would agree with. But then he says, yeah, those things have become dogma. And he says, yet the opposite principles are probably more correct. So he says, and these are the 4 opposing ones, it's better to risk boldness than triviality. Again, think towards Elon and think, I'm going to probably use Elon a few times, yeah, which is sad because he's like, he's a good example to use, but also he's like he's such an outlier that it's sometimes not helpful, because you can think like, oh yeah, just do what he's doing and then things will work. And I mean, he has his own issues. So, I think we've said in the past on this podcast, like, I'm glad that people like him exist, but I wouldn't want to be him. So yeah, it's better to risk boldness than triviality, because of those things where you can actually make progress because you're partying like it's 1999 and you're like, we can do this. And then you actually make those steps rather than just sort of doing the same old. And then he says, 2, a bad plan is better than no plan. So that's opposed to saying lean and flexible. Because the lean and flexible thing is sort of, we don't have a plan, but rather just at least have a plan, even if it's a bad one. Then competitive markets destroy profits is the third one. So that's opposed to improve on competition. And because his whole thing is like, if you're doing a startup, don't fall into the competition trap. Because, he touches on it many times in the book, but even with school and things, he says that we get so lost into thinking that competition is this thing that we have to do. Like, of course we have to compete. Like, that's the norm.
We have to be the best of the best.
Yeah. And he's like, you need to get far away from that. Just don't even think about competition, because you shouldn't be trying to compete, because there's so many others in that competition that you're bound to really struggle and probably fail.
I mean, he didn't properly phrase it like that, but I'm just a thought now. I was thinking about how he says why his employees at PayPal were successful is because they were all given different roles. And I don't know if he actually said it, but if I think about it now, that actually eliminated competition, because everyone had a definite role, like a well-defined role that they needed to, because he did say everyone was evaluated based on that specific role he assigned to them, you know. So in a sense, he was eliminating competition, and
that's within the company, because he views it as those two different things. It's competition as in competing with outsider,
but also as individuals, because
exactly within that company.
That school example is an individual sort of competition, not company wide. But he kind of says the effects are very similar on individual as a business, businesses.
And then the fourth one is sales matter just as much as product. I think I'm slowly wrapping my head around that, but I was reflecting on it, and it's kind of funny because he talks about the sales and distribution. Are you gonna?
No, God, that's just the points that you struggle with. Always interesting ones, but
So because I always tend towards I like creating things. I don't like selling things, especially like the whole snake oil selling kind of vibe, which obviously Thiel isn't being like, sell snake oil. But I remember with the phone stand thing. So we created something and it's cool. Like, it's a very simple design. I mean, it did really well when we put it on the Thingiverse marketplace, which is, for those who don't know, it's like a online 3D marketplace. Well, it's not a marketplace, sorry.
It's where people share their designs.
Share their designs, yeah. There are 3D marketplaces, which in retrospect, maybe that's where we should have put it. But the cool thing is, like, people really liked it, and like not a small amount of people either. But we tried to do the manufacturing thing, and you joined in that venture, and to say it nicely, we were not good at that. Like, we are not good at.
It was a confirmation that some of us just need to stay employees.
Yeah, we need to make other people rich. But yeah, it's because, and I think the idea is sort of, if I have this great thing, then obviously people will buy it. But that's not actually the case. You need to make people aware of it, and you need to go through that process of making it easy for people to get hold of, which is difficult, and that's like a whole thing on its own. So yeah, it's something I'd like to get better at, but not the snake oil sales part, but just like when you have a product that you know is valuable, and you can convey that well, and you can also set up the right distribution channels for that. Whether that's like, the distribution channel could be in your current company, you just chat to people and you say, why don't you use this thing because it's helpful. That's one sort of way of doing sales. It's not specifically selling something for money, but it's still
creating awareness.
Yeah, I think Thiel would still classify that under sales. but then also it could be like going door to door and saying, even though that won't really work these days, but going in quotes door to door.
You might think, but again, it goes back to there's that section under the chapter that it says it's about planting the idea. You know, because I think so often we think that it hasn't got into us, but one way or another, it has got into us. You know, like for instance, I mean, I don't know if they still claim this, but Apple always claimed that they're a product-driven company. You know, that they don't need to advertise. Kind of the product, kind of, you know, does it on its own. But in essence, like if you really think about it, I feel they created a product that sort of does the advertising, which is the sales pitch. You know, they've created a product that when people look at it, just like, oh, because he actually puts it that it was like the aim was to create very well designed product, like, you know, something that's well designed and whatnot. And it's like that was shifted towards that if people see an Apple device, it's like, oh, what's that? You know, it grabs their attention and whatnot, but it's like it's more like a self-marketing to more or less.
Sorry, Karen.
No.
I think I kind of agree, but I also disagree. I don't know. Maybe you're not saying this.
But that's what I'm saying. Like, I don't know how much of it still exists now, but initially when they started, that was essentially the idea that they were going with.
Yeah.
Now I don't like where I was going with. I was like, now I don't think so much anymore because it's like everywhere, you know. But yeah,
That's the thing. I think it's and this is what I would, if I was to put myself in the mind of Peter, not you, Peter. But then I think he would say something like, Apple's one of the most incredible things about Steve Jobs was, I mean,
there is somewhere that he talks about it.
Yeah, I think we'll get to it. I'm sure I have a note somewhere about it, but where it's essentially like the design thing, but it's not about the product design. That's a part of it, and it's a very important part about it. But the distribution and sales, and not in the like very in your face sales. So I think you're right about the aesthetic of the product being part of the selling, but what Thiel is saying is, if you think that that's the only thing that's going to sell, if you think focus on product, not sales, then you're going to fall into the trap. But if you realize that sales matter just as much as the product, then what you'll do is you'll set up things that make it easy to sell. So one of the things that Jobs was really good at was not just focusing on the product and being obsessive about every little aspect of the product, but also making it easy to sell. Because when you go into an Apple store, it's really like nice. And it almost makes you want to like, be a part of that ecosystem.
Be part of the cult.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that is a very strong form of sales. And I think Thiel would say that's the best kind of sales, because it's not like, hey, buy this thing, you must buy this thing. It's just like, it makes it so easy and so enticing for you to buy it that it's like, oh, okay.
I want to buy that.
Aside from the fact that you have to take out like a R1 million loan to buy.
So you live or something.
Yeah. But yeah, long story short, I think we both agree sales matters more than we realized. There's two last things there. So it says here, less important but more obvious. It was also a peak of clarity. So this is talking about the early 2000s and 1999. So it's still in that party like it's 1999 chapter. So the market high of 2000 was obviously a peak of insanity. Less obvious but more important though, it was also the peak of clarity. Because people looked far into the future and saw how much valuable technology we would need to get there safely, and they judged themselves capable of creating it. We still need new technology, and we even may need some 1999 style hubris and exuberance to get it. And then he says here at the end, which is what you said earlier, ask yourself how much of what you know about business is shapen by mistaken reactions to past mistakes. The most contrarian thing of all is not to oppose the crowd, but to think for yourself. So yeah, that's actually the kind of stuff that you were talking about earlier.
But when I read that, do you know what book came to mind?
What?
How We Think.
Yeah.
I was like, that point is quite opposing to, some of the ideas that were put forth by that book.
I think it was similar because they were talking about not getting lost in the sort of cult mentality. So
it has the independence thinking, but it also kind of says you need to think together. And this kind of is like you need to think
you
for
can't
yourself.
think in isolation. I don't know if Thiel means like completely by yourself, because he would still be like you need to have that small group of people
like
that you can
that
you can think through things with.
Yeah, which is interesting because it kind of even down the line kind of opposes starting a business on your own. He kind of encourages you having, so it's a very interesting.
I think in all of the ideas, like with most things, it's tying pieces together. Like this is true in certain contexts, but then in other contexts, it's unhealthy. Like if you only thinking by yourself all the time, you probably are looking towards an insane asylum because you it's not all ideas that are terrible. But if you're wanting to start a startup and you're thinking the same way as everyone else, then you're going to fall into competition. And that's not good.
But again, if you think about yourself, you do not know what everyone else is thinking.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so in conclusion, do a bit of thinking about yourself and not. Okay, shall we go into chapter 3?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So all companies are different. All happy companies are different. So this is essentially a chapter on discussing the benefits of a monopoly. So that's what he means by different. The monopolies generally, like Google, you can think of as a search and advertising monopoly. Okay, not specifically advertising, but a search monopoly. And then other companies like Tesla, I guess, is sort of a monopoly, and SpaceX as well, because they made massive moves there. Although it's debatable over time, Tesla will be less of a monopoly. But yeah, I mean, monopolies do unique things, and in that way, they are happily different from others because, going back to what we keep on saying, they don't fall into the competition trap. Yeah. So then he gives you the contrarian question. Remember, he had that interview question about what thought do you have that's opposed to other people's thoughts. But the contrarian question for companies is, what valuable company is nobody building? So think about that and then get back to us with your great idea so that we can build a great company together. Actually, don't do that. Peter and I are probably not the people to build it with. Okay, but on page 24, there's the I guess summary of economics. So I don't know if I should maybe read through that quick to discuss perfect competition. So yeah, economists use two simplified models to explain the difference between perfect competition and a monopoly. And then the summarized version is that perfect competition is considered as the ideal default state for economics. And under perfect competition in the long run, this is what Thiel claims, is under perfect competition in the long run, no company makes an economic profit because everyone is fighting, and then you end up just being like, okay, companies come in, make things, and they compete and they drive down the price, but then they get extinct because it's too low and no profit and stuff. So that's perfect competition. And Thiel's like, this is bad. And so then he says, yeah, in this book, we're not interested in illegal bullies or government favorites. By monopoly, we mean the kind of company that's so good at what it does that no other firm can offer a close substitute. Yeah. This is the section where we were discussing how I didn't see capitalism and competition as being opposites.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, also interesting. Because you'd think capitalism and competition kind of go together because everyone's competing for capital and stuff. But Thiel is saying, actually, capitalism is premised on the accumulation of capital, but under perfect competition, all profits get competed away. The lesson for entrepreneurs is clear. If you want to create and capture lasting value, don't build an undifferentiated commodity business. So basically be different. Yeah. It clears up that idea of competition and monopoly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, then I don't know if you want to add anything there, Peter.
No, nothing to add. I think you've covered most.
Okay, then page 28. So I've got a note here where it says, so it's under the section called competitive lies. And these are essentially the lies that people tell themselves when they're wanting to start a new company. And so he says here, entrepreneurs are always biased to understate the scale of competition, but that's the biggest mistake a startup can make. So, yeah, he says that we often trick ourselves into, when we're entering into a competitive market. Later on in the book, he talks about green energy, the green energy market. And then he says, what people will say is, it's, I can't remember what the numbers are, but let's say it's $1 trillion market. And so if I was to capture 20% of the market, then I'll make so much money, it's crazy. And like, I can definitely capture 20% of the market. And then what you don't realize is that
that's 1% of the global market.
Yeah, it shrinks further and further of the global solar market.
And then 0.1 of the entire solar market.
The entire energy market. Because what he was saying is you end up, instead of saying, okay, we are competing in the energy space and there's a crazy amount of competition, what people do, and it's a massive mistake that they make, is they will look and almost pretend that they are differentiated when they're actually not. So
yeah, I think it's about not understanding what the problem is. And I mean, if you go back to our days where we tried something, for us to feel better about what we're delivering. Because if you really think about it, if you read this book, you're like, how many phone stands are there really?
Yeah.
But then our business coach at the time said to frame it as we're selling convenience, So like if you grab around that, it's like, okay, that's what we're selling. We're the only people driving this, So it's the same as the solar craze. People were like, oh, if we capture 20% of the market, it's like, but again, like you said, it's just in the solar market. Like, what other alternative energies are there? Because if you think of brought about the gas that also, since the prices of that were slumped so low that even made it harder for them to sell solar. So it's like people sort of try to be as oblivious as possible to what their competitors may be. They have this tunnel vision, which I think is what he's advising, I guess, that you really need to understand which industry you're really getting into, and
And how much competition really
It
is
is
there?
there, you know, like, because I mean, even in that, before you get there, it's about the whole how the US advertising industry compares to the
Yes, yeah.
whole world. You know, there's that as also like Google might seem to be leading in the US, but where does it actually fall across the globe? You know,
Yeah.
there's that. I mean, there's sections where it dominates the market, like the search engine. Like, I mean, he goes on to say it's so vast that it's actually a dictionary term now. Like, Googling
Yeah.
has made its way into the dictionary. You know,
Yeah.
that just shows you at what level that business, you know,
Operating,
is
yeah.
operating. But the other aspect of Google that I'm sure not everyone knows about. You
Mm.
know, I mean, I think if you tell most people that Google is one of the biggest advertising agencies, they actually don't know that.
Yeah.
They're like, what do you mean by that? But they forget that YouTube is, you know, riddled with ads. Like, how do you think the ads end up there? Someone's
Mm.
paying for those ads to be there, you know? So, yeah, it's about not having a clear picture of what you're getting yourself into. You know?
Yeah. And it's funny as well because he says the the thing with non-monopolists, so he obviously when a company becomes a monopoly, they don't want to
Label
label
themselves
themselves as a
as
monopoly.
monopoly.
So then he says, yeah, the thing with non-monopolists is that they exaggerate their distinction by defining their market as the intersection of smaller markets. So they like, for example, if you are a restaurant, you might say, I'm a British food restaurant, and I'm in Palo Alto, and that's my specific niche. But actually, you're competing with just restaurants all over the place, and so it's a much, and you're also competing with a bunch of other things like food chains and stuff like that because you can go to a grocery shop or so people make the mistake of saying defining themselves as the intersection of lots of things and saying no, that's my
That's
niche,
niche.
which in some sense might be true.
Yeah.
But you need to be very careful and
Yeah.
make very sure that it is a real niche and not like it's just a deceptive. You think it's a niche, but it's not actually.
And the niche that people actually want.
Exactly.
Because it's like,
exactly. Yeah.
who,
That's
who,
probably more important. Yeah.
who told you that people they actually want their British food?
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah. But then on the contrast, monopolists disguise their monopoly by framing it as the union of several larger markets. So a search engine might say no, but we're like a search engine and we also do mobile phones and we also do wearables. And if you look at that market, like it's massive. But in terms of just search engine, Google's like 70 or whatever percent
So
of
the market share, yeah.
So yeah, it's funny. Okay, monopoly capitalism. So it says here, do outsized profits, so this is page 32, do outsized profits come at the expense of the rest of society? Actually, yes. Profits come out of consumers' wallets, and monopolies deserve their bad reputation. And then he says here, but only in a world where nothing changes. So monopolies, so again, the chapter is framed under happy companies are different, and so most people think, okay, monopoly bad. That's the way that people think. And he's saying, look, if you think about monopolies as these things that just take everyone's money and don't add value to the world, yeah, they are bad. But his definition of monopoly is to say it's something that creates new value so valuable that other people can't compete. And it's not old value done better or big companies buying up everything. He's saying new value. And so in a world where nothing changes, you write about monopolies saying, okay, they're very bad. But in a world where monopolies actually create value, what he calls creative monopolists give customers more choice by adding entirely new categories of abundance to the world. Creative monopolies are not just good for the rest of society, they're powerful engines for making it better. So yeah, I think it's a good argument for monopolies being a good thing. I've got a last point for that chapter on page 34. He ends the chapter off here by saying all happy companies are different. Each one earns a monopoly by solving a unique problem. All failed companies are the same. They fail to escape competition. So,
I have that book.
yeah, we often end up with the same things. Okay. Should we move on to the ideology of competition? Ideology was always a word that tripped me up. But ideology is just ideas. Like a set of ideas that someone or some group of people hold to. So ideology of competition is talking about when you have or when you're thinking about competition, what are the ideas that people have and hold to that are dangerous, I guess. So he opens the chapter there. Creative monopoly means new products that benefit everybody and sustainable profits for the creator. Competition means no profits for anybody, no meaningful differentiation, and a struggle for survival. Then page 36, higher education is the place where people... So this is that discussion that we had. Higher education is the place where people who had big dreams in high school get stuck in a fierce rivalry with equally smart peers over conventional careers like management consulting and investment banking. Yep. The dangers of the way that we think about what we have to do. Like we have to compete. Yeah. I don't know if you have any thoughts there.
Yeah, like I said, it was interesting, like you said, like to have someone, again, like his question, like kind of oppose an idea that, I mean, I believe most of my life has sort of been pushed. You know, we always pushed into competing with one another, but not actually. I think no one actually points out how damaging it can actually be. I think we see the end results. I mean, for instance, like social media, everyone's trying to put their best foot forward. That's an ideal example or an example of competition. Everyone wants to one up the other, and what are the end results? People find themselves in not so good states, you know, because they're like, oh, look at that person, I'm trying to be like them, but I can't, and that comes with all sorts of other things, you know. But no one has ever actually expressed that as a result of competition, because essentially it is. I mean, it's framed in different ways, and I think we've spoken about the effects of social media in different books in a different way. But if you think about it in this sense, that's another idea that you can add to that. That it's at the end of the day, it's people competing with one another.
Yeah, we get lost in that competition, and we think that that what he would say is like rivalry is the thing that we have to do
to drive us. Like I mean, even in our careers, like we feel like we need to compete with our peers, our colleagues, but in actual sense, that's more damaging than actually delegating work properly. Like have everyone do what they know best. I think that's actually more beneficial to an organization than people competing.
Yeah, tying back to that idea that you mentioned.
But society has just sort of preached the whole idea of competition at any level. And that's what it says. Like we're in this pool where at every level it's like, we taught the same thing, but at the same time it's like someone has to come out as the best, because that's what exams are structured to be. And only those that don't just learn the bare minimum are the ones that end up being A students. But, you know, if you actually just do as it intends, you're still not good enough, you know, but that's what you're taught. Only if you then take that extra mile to be like, oh, I'll work hard at this, you know, learn more than what was taught to us, we end up being an A student. You know, it's that competition mentality that drives people in that regard. And on the surface, that's good, you know, because that's what we've been taught all along, but we forget what other effects arise from that,
Yeah. It's like the classic where if you are going to university and you're like, what are the best jobs? It's like engineer, doctor, lawyer, those kinds of things. And that's true. Those are good jobs, but they are such fiercely competitive jobs. And I mean, maybe not as competitive as like entering a market, because there's lots of legal things that need to happen. There's lots of engineering that needs to be done and stuff like that. So it's not like you're not gonna be successful if you do learn really hard and things and compete in that. But you're not gonna get that. What he says later is the power law. You're not going to get that exponential difference and value if you are just lost in that competing with other people. If you're going to become the best doctor, that's a wonderful thing, but it's don't like forget that it's an extremely competitive thing, and you're gonna spend a lot of time trying to be better than other people when that's not needed. Like you really actually don't need to do that. You just need to do the things that you are interested in doing well. And I mean, someone could argue that it is needed. You need to literally pass exams and things, but yeah.
We're not saying that everyone needs to be a doctor, but it's just that I think you kind of need to know beforehand that that's what you're destined to do, if I may. But once there, you're not supposed to, how can I put this? Crush other people in the process, if I may. Like you need to learn to work with others, to kind of do an even better job. You're not supposed to do things that will make others look bad, the process,
Yeah, I think he ends off the chapter like perfectly. He says, if you can recognize competition as a destructive force instead of a sign of value, you're already more sane than most. Because most of us get lost in the ideology of competition. But actually, it can be a very destructive thing.
Yeah.
And so be sane and don't get lost in that. Cool. Should we go to the last mover advantage?
Yeah.
Okay, so the last mover advantage, I thought that what he was saying here is that you need to wait until other people have done stuff in the field and then
do something.
And I think he's not directly saying that. What he's actually saying is, because this chapter is about durability and about durability being key. So when he says last mover advantage, he's saying be the last one to make the big move that basically makes you the monopoly in that thing, in that field. And that's what he means by last mover advantage. So he starts off the chapter there saying, escaping competition will give you a monopoly, but even a monopoly is only a great business if it can endure the future. And so, durability is key. You need to be the last one that does the big move. Later on he says, for a company to be valuable, it must grow and endure, which, same sort of principles. And often people will focus on what are the things that I need to do now to make sure that like the company survives the next little bit.
Yeah.
But he talks about if you are thinking like that, you might survive for the next little bit, but most likely if you're not at some point trying to look towards the future, like he talks about that 10 to 20 year horizon, then you're probably going to fail over time because you'll end up just being outcompeted. I don't know if you want to look at page 48 for those.
Yeah, the different points.
Yeah, do you want to read through them and then we can chat
Yeah,
about them?
you can go for it.
Okay, so it says here, and this is it's about thinking about how to make a durable company. So every monopoly is unique, but they usually share some combination of the following characteristics. Those characteristics are proprietary technology, network effects, economies of scale, and branding. So I think proprietary technology is somewhat obvious. Like, you need to have something that's either completely different or it's so much better. What he would put is the 10 times better category.
Yeah.
If you just 20% better,
The after effects are not worth, making that change. I think it kind of puts it that way.
yeah, he says something along the lines of if you only make something 20% better, what you'll end up finding is most likely the amount of effort to get people aware of that change and to try and sell that change and all of that will actually
it negates that 20%.
Yeah, it will just be eaten away by that, which is crazy to think because we think like, oh, if I make something 20% better, like that's a big improvement.
I think again, I think this is where context is also vital because, and I mean, we'll go back to I know we've referenced it, that green, what's it called again?
Green energy stuff. Yeah.
Green, the chapter. But it's more of, if you claiming that your product is 20% better, you're forgetting the part where that requires people to get rid of stuff. So, and I think it kind of puts in that. Some people say like it's not worth us getting rid of stuff that we already have. Put new stuff in just for a 20% increase, and I think he kind of also mentioned that that's like one industry where the efficiency over time hasn't been improved a lot. And I think, I mean, going back to when I was studying physics, that's still a big research field, it's a big research field on how to increase the efficiency. But the thing is, you only do it so much, and in most cases, it's how to actually get what already is there to perform better. There's still that research of trying to produce the best, thin film.
PV photovoltaic.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's like, it's more about improving the performance of already what's been created. I think there's very little reinventing the wheel in that category, if I may.
Yeah. And it shows as well in that category. I mean, there's a few massive manufacturers that basically outcompete all of the other people. Like, I can't remember what the main ones are, but there's like Canadian Solar and JA Solar and a few of those kind of ones. And Genco as well, I think. That they're the biggest brands and they sell globally, even in South Africa, because it's so difficult to if you want to compete with those kind of companies, they have such low margins, I would imagine, on their panels and stuff and if you create something that's even fractionally, like even if you create something that's like 10% better, you still need to set up the distribution and sales and all of that, and that takes an immense amount of effort and costs a lot of money and stuff. So, yeah. Okay, then, so network effects is the other one. I think those are fairly obvious. I mean, like Facebook getting people to sign up, and then once there's a lot of people signed up, then, network effects. Economies of scale is similar as well. Creating a lot of things, spreading out your costs over a large quantity of sales is obviously an important thing. And so he says, a good startup should have should have the potential, for great scale built into its first design. And then the last one is branding. So creating a strong brand is obviously a powerful way to claim a monopoly. Like Apple is just such a strong brand that if they were to create another product, it will it will almost definitely
Likely.
do well. Yeah, I don't know if you want to touch on anything more on those just 4 points. I think they kind of speak for
They
themselves.
speak for themselves. Yeah, and then I think that just ties in with building a monopoly, which is the next section.
Yeah, I mean that's a great section. There's
And
the,
that's yeah,
no, go for it.
and that's saying it. It's something we talked about here. I mean, the first point of building a monopoly is like start small and monopolize. I think it's an idea that we spoke about, that when you sort of need to, how can I put this, limit yourself in a way to be like, I want to be there, but at the same time it's like I need to start with a very small group.
Yeah.
You kind of need to have the mentality of breaking into the market, not kind of I've arrived, having that I've arrived statement, in a way. Yeah.
For me, it's difficult to like. I struggle to still figure out what would fall into that category. Obviously, there's the examples that exist already, but in terms of new examples, I still struggle. And I know he talks about finding a secret later and things like that, but because I agree with the start small thing, and I think it's something that most of us don't do well. We most of the time want to be like even in the solar example, they're comparing themselves to saying on the global market level, and it's like no, don't do that. You need to start small, but what is difficult for me is to try and distinguish between the unhelpful saying I'm going to start super small, like the restaurant business, where you're saying I'm a restaurant, but I'm specifically doing the British English thing and in a specific place, and I'm going to be the best there. And that's that can be something that doesn't work out well, or it can be something that works out well. Like, for example, Jack's Bagels. Jack's Bagels was a unique idea that they somehow happened to get right. Like, it's a nice, the branding that they did was nice, the bagels idea is nice, like they had some aesthetic, and they started off small, and then they've now expanded, and now there's a bunch of Jack's Bagels. And so that's a restaurant thing that it's very similar, but it was different, and that's I am still a little bit lost as to
I think it's
what is the small that is correctly small.
I think it's that differs in terms of how can I put this? It differs per product or per idea. I mean, if I latch onto your Jack Sparrow's idea, it's like they didn't, when they started, they went all over PE. So it's like you sort of create, I think they went to this sort of, this is our idea, and then they created a demand for it, because I think there was only one branch at first. I don't know where it was.
Yeah, probably.
And then it's like they properly created a demand for it because people were like, oh, one Jack Sparrow, and you knew there was only one Jack Sparrow you could go to. And then they expanded within PE and kind of were like, okay, like we're still creating some sort of demand, because I think from that alone, like, I mean, if you have a few, one by the beachfront, people come see that, and I mean, it's a tourists, a lot of people travel in and out of that area, that taking it then to a different city was much easier, because then that created that presence to be like, oh, I've seen this somewhere before, then let's try it out. And then that's sort of the domino effect in that regard. Because, for instance, if they had multiple in all the cities, because the initial thing would have been, what's that? And then probably their running costs would have been way higher, you know?
And there's no like brand that they've built up. And
Exactly. So I think that's, again, that's what I said, it varies per idea. Because there's some where I think it talks about, for instance, let's say the PayPal idea. It was still not, remember they talked about how marketing it would have cost them a lot more money, but how did they go about that? We'll pay every person that joins, because then that is like, if I join and I get $10, you want to tell a friend to be like, join that, you get free money, and that's how that
Yeah,
word
that viral
spreads, you know.
marketing
And again, to them, they started small. They didn't go out and be like, "Oh, we given any new joiner $10," because then they would have probably crashed,
Yeah.
you know. But it expanded from a small scale and kind of scaled up
Yeah.
from there.
Yeah, I think and I don't know if we'll solve it now, but I still am. So I'm still struggling to distinguish why, for example, something like Jack's Bagels worked, whereas some other restaurant might not
Okay,
have
okay,
worked.
okay.
Because like Jack's Bagels, right? I mean, there's lots of things that you could say. Well, of course, Jack's Bagels would work because like there wasn't a bagels thing here, and it tastes nice, and yeah. But then on the other side, if someone came to you with a Jack's Bagels idea and said, "Cool, give me some money and invest in it because I've got this idea to start a bagels thing," I probably wouldn't have given them money. Like now in retrospect, I'm like, yeah, of course I would have given them money. Like, look, Jack's Bagels is great. But I wouldn't have probably given them money because it's like, if you, not that I have money to give, but if I had money to give, it would be something like, but there's lots of restaurants. The statistics of restaurants failing is like huge. Like,
what's setting you apart?
What's setting you apart?
But again, it goes back to that whole creating a need. Like, there's probably, again, this goes back maybe to the secrets or untapped ideas. Like, this is a common thing. It's like we just haven't thought of the idea that everyone wants. Like, I mean, the question in the business aspect is like, what business is no one starting, essentially, you know? Again, so it's like, probably the British restaurant thing can work. It's just probably you need to then do a lot of research about where you want to start it up to see, is there really a need for that? You see, because I feel like maybe that's where most people miss. Because again, like you said, there are a lot of restaurants out there, and as you said, the success and failure rate are sort of, you know, the failures are probably higher than the successes. But again, it goes back to, and I would say probably it's about unique ideas. Because let's, for instance, look at, we're putting a lot of names within Peter. Let's think about Beer Shack. When Beer Shack started, what attracted people to Beer Shack, if you remember?
I don't.
Remember that concept of having benches where you could write on?
Oh, okay.
You know? And everyone wanted to go to Beer Shack. And if you go now, like, that wall is like painted and has been removed, you know?
Yeah.
But that was like a driving force. People actually wanted to go and like leave their mark in the restaurant. Like, it seems mundane, but it was like something unique, and it actually attracted customers there.
Yeah.
And look at them now. Like, you know, it's like how many years now, and it's still going strong.
Yeah.
You know, and that idea is far gone.
But that guy, whoever, like, because I think it's the same guy. I don't know if it's the same guy as Jack's Bagels. It might be, it might not be. I can't remember. But the same guy who started, I think, Charlie's also started.
No, it's
Beer Shack and like Tiger Milk and
it's not the same family as the Jack's Burger, but yeah, they have a chain of restaurants.
Yeah.
Hopefully they don't listen to this. So
if they do, well done. Like they are somehow they've managed to
do it right.
Yeah,
and I mean,
every
restaurant of theirs, if you actually were to think about it, all their menus are in the same font. You know.
Yeah, there's very different aspects, but there's also
similarities. Yeah.
But okay, let's move on to. So I mean, I think we already touched on the scaling up aspect. So it's the three different parts. The one is the starting small and monopolize, and then so it's scaling up as well is the other one. So once you've dominated that niche market, then you should gradually expand. We touched on Jack's Bagels doing quite well there. And then this was something that I found really surprising again. This book had a lot of nice surprises. He says here, don't disrupt.
Yeah.
That's one of the other things. So Silicon Valley has become obsessed with disruption, they say. And then it says, this seemingly trivial fad matters because it distorts an entrepreneur's self-understanding in an inherently competitive way. So it basically makes you think competitively. So don't disrupt is saying, don't fall into the trap. I'm just using that phrase a lot. Don't fall into the trap of trying to disrupt a market. Just like do something different. He says here, PayPal could be seen as disruptive, but we didn't try to directly change any large competitor. It's true that we took some business away from Visa when we popularized internet payments, but since we expanded the market for payments overall, we gave Visa far more business than we took. So he says, yeah, as you craft a plan to expand to adjacent markets, don't disrupt. Avoid competition as much as possible. Okay, should I close off that chapter?
Yeah, you may.
So it says there, it's much better to be the last mover, that is, to make the last great development in a specific market and enjoy years or even decades of monopoly profits. The way to do that is to dominate a small niche and scale up from there towards your ambitious long-term vision. Yeah, I think it's a great way of ending that section off. Okay, should we go through the lottery ticket one? I think we still have a bit to go, but we can maybe run through a bit faster.
Yeah, not cool.
Okay, so you are not a lottery ticket. So this is the chapter where they talk about those 4 different aspects. And essentially, the premise is people think it's about being lucky and chance. But Thiel is saying hundreds of people have started very valuable businesses, and lots of them have started multiple multi-million-dollar businesses. And if it's the case that it's just about luck, that wouldn't make sense.
Yeah.
So there's definitely aspects of luck, but don't fall into the thought of
it's
luck.
Not
it's
always
just luck.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then he says there'd be a definite, or the summary of it is, be a definite optimist, have a good plan for the future, and pursue it like you know it will happen. So this is the chapter that I confused with the 1999.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, parting
okay.
markets, 1999. Yeah, I think the chapter goes on and it carries on to give 4 different views: the indefinite pessimism, definite pessimism, definite optimism, and that. And he digs into each of those. But in summary, like we often think in almost like an indefinite optimist way. Like we're hopeful about the future, but we kind of are. It's not definite, and we're not sure about how things will pan out and stuff. But like, it's probably gonna get better. And what that causes is that we don't end up actually forcefully pursuing the change. We kind of just let it happen.
We're expecting the change, but not actually being the change.
Yeah, driving that change. And I mean, the summary there's just, we need to, instead of just like being like it's gonna happen, we need to figure out how we can push for it and have that more optimistic view of driving that change. Yeah, this is the chapter where, so it's on page 79.
Okay.
This is where he talks about Steve Jobs and the design thing. So it says here, it's true that every great entrepreneur is first and foremost a designer, but the most important lesson to learn from Jobs has nothing to do with aesthetics. The greatest thing Jobs designed was his business. Apple imagined and executed a definite multi-year plan to create new products and distribute them effectively. Jobs saw that you can change the world through careful planning, not by listening to focus groups or feedbacks or copying others' success. Long-term planning is often undervalued by our indefinite short-term world. So yeah, have a plan, even if it's a bad one.
I mean, if you think about it, that still exists now. Every year, everyone looks forward to the Apple events. You know, like it's an, we just know that, you know, and I mean, if you really think about it, all the other tech companies sort of copied into that. I mean, I know Samsung also now has their own unveiling events, and so yeah.
And I think Apple does quite well at building out technologies and subtly introducing them in ways that aren't obvious to consumers but tie into future visions that in retrospect you're like, oh, okay, this is how those things link. So the iPod tying towards the iPhone and making the like touchscreen interfaces and things like that, tying into iPads and that. And then even if you think about the new sensors and things that they've put in the newer iPhones, so some of those sensors like facial recognition sensors, I think they've got the distance sensors and things like that. And exactly. And those kind of things tie into their future visions, like for the Apple Pro headset and stuff. Their Apple Pro headset was almost like orders of magnitude better than existing ones. And it's because they're integrating all of these things together so well. But they've been working on them behind the scenes and putting it into iPhones and things and then joining them together and learning.
It's like continuously testing stuff that isn't necessary for that product, but for a future product.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And the last note that I have in that chapter is a startup is the largest endeavor over which you have definite mastery, which you can have definite mastery. You can have not just agency over your own life, but over a small and important part of the world. It begins by rejecting the unjust tyranny of chance. You're not just a lottery ticket. I think some of the stuff that he says in the book makes me feel like I want to go and create something.
Yeah,
you know, because he's like, you can have agency, and contribute a small and important thing to the world, which is just cool. Okay, following the money, chapter 7. So this one is just about the power law and the value of monopolies. Where he talks about the different. We think that things sort of, I guess, linearly increase over time, but often what happens in monopolies is like it's very slow start in the beginning, and then bam, all of a sudden it's like exponential.
And you might also take a dip, so it's actually you might experience some losses before you actually have that turnaround.
Yeah, especially in the technology world. So he says here, so page 86, that the biggest secret, because he's in venture capital, so in basically giving other companies money, like investing in them at the early stages. So he says the biggest secret in venture capital is that the best investment in a successful funds equals or outperforms the entire rest of the fund combined. So it's that principle. I'm sure that there was another book that touched on this as well, which is that
it's part of the philosophy of money, or what's it?
It could be, yeah. Actually, you might be right about that. Because the idea is when you think about, like if you have a fund where you're investing in different properties or different companies or whatever, you would think that, okay, well, like this one will give a bit of money, that one will give a bit of money, but one is not going to like ridiculously outvalue any of the other ones. But he's saying that actually most of the time what ends up happening is that it's one or two companies that make
money,
the massive bulk of all of the change in the world, the money, the etc. And so you have to kind of, when you're wanting to start something, you need to try and, or if you're wanting to make money from investing in companies and things like that, you need to look out for those companies that you can be like, those that has a chance of doing like incredibly well.
I mean, I think there was one example where it gives about, I've forgotten what the company was, but the company made, I think it was like a 300% profit or something. It was maybe 300 is even, but it was like, it performed really well. But the downside was that was the smallest portion of the venture capital. Majority of it went to a different company, which didn't perform as well. So there's also that. So you, like you're saying, you need to carefully pick the companies you're investing in and hope for. The chances are not all of them will make lots of money, but there will be, like you say, one or two that really will perform well.
Yeah. And he ties that back as well to how we live our lives and we do things. So
Yeah.
almost like lessons that we can learn from the power law idea. If you wanting to make like great strides in some field or something, what you shouldn't do is diversify and just become like a jack of all trades, master of none. What you should do is choose something specific and almost plow and focus on that. I don't have any good answers for when to do something like that, because I think it is valuable when you're young to have a broad, diverse set of interests and do lots of things. Because having like a broad set of skills helps you with other things. But at the same time, if I look at myself, I think that, and I was actually having this discussion with a friend the other day, I think that often I'll end up just doing lots of random things instead of focusing on specific things. And so I think one of the things that I'd like to do over time is try and say, okay, what is something that, and it almost just in some sense doesn't matter what it is, but just choosing something and focusing and pushing on that thing. It's not to say that you can't change at some point, but to really drive down, like if you want to become a really good software developer or something like that, or if you want to become a really good soccer player or something, at some point you're going to have to commit and try and be like, okay, this is the thing that I'm going to go for. Yeah. Okay, so something else here was at the bottom of page 91. It's about the idea of starting up a company or not. And especially in a book like this, you think like, okay, I have to, this means starting up a company. It's a startup. But he says here, it doesn't matter what you do, you should focus relentlessly on something you're good at doing. But before that, you must think hard about whether it will be valuable in the future. For the startup world, this means you should not necessarily start your own company, even if you're extraordinarily talented. If anything, too many people are starting their own companies today. People who understand the power law will hesitate more than others when it comes to founding a new venture. They know how tremendously successful they could become by joining the very best company while it's growing fast. So, and then he says, yeah, you could have 100% of the equity if you fully fund your own venture. But if it fails, you have 100% of nothing. Owning just 0.01% of Google, by contrast, is incredibly valuable, more than $35 million at the time of this writing. Yeah, so identifying, like, let's say you're looking for a new job and you are you like the idea of being part of something new and starting up a company. Should you start up a company? And he's saying, ironically, because he's a startup founder investor, ironically he's saying, maybe don't start up the company, because the power law is saying most of those companies are going to fail and they're going to produce virtually like negligible results. But some of the companies are going to do unbelievably well and they will produce the vast majority of the results. So if you can identify the companies that are growing and you can see like, oh, okay, this is probably going to become something really well and it's heading towards that trajectory. If you can jump in early enough, then
chances are,
yeah, you're in for that 0.01% of Google, which isn't a bad thing. So yeah, I think it's a really cool take on it. Because yeah, I've always thought you need to start something, but maybe you just need to be there.
just
early
need to
enough.
be associated with people that have studied something great.
Yeah,
That's why I'm friends with you, James.
that's why I'm friends with you, Peter. Okay, shall we go on to the secrets one?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, there's not. I think the general idea is just saying monopolies usually have some secret. There's some idea that they have, looking at that contrarian question, there's some idea that they have which other people kind of neglect, but they are like, no, this thing is the way that it is, and they pursue that thing and focus on that thing. And so this chapter touches on a few different aspects of that, like what makes a secret and a few different things. But I think an interesting point that he touches on is page 97, where he talks about 4 social trends that have conspired to root out our belief in secrets. Because obviously, I think a lot of people at the moment look at secrets and they're like, oh, there's not really much new stuff to be discovered in the world. So many things have already been there. I think we possibly as a society getting out of that slump, because we're seeing like, oh, you know, there are actually quite a lot of different new aspects of things. But yeah, I think we're still in a little bit of a slump. And he says here, there's 4 social trends that root out that belief. The first is incrementalism. So we're taught that the right way to do things is to proceed a step at a time. So meaning that there's no like interesting
Nothing
things
new.
to be discovered.
Yeah, we just have to better the stuff that already exists.
Yeah. Second is risk aversion. So people are scared of secrets because they're scared of being wrong, which is seriously unhelpful. And from so many aspects, because even if you think about learning, if you want to learn something, you have to be willing to be wrong.
Yeah, to fail at it.
You just have to sort of be like, okay, it's fine. I'm gonna be wrong, and then I'm gonna learn something. You're not gonna be perfect with everything from the start all the time. Then the third is complacency. Yeah, just being complacent. And the fourth is flatness. And he says here, by flatness he means, as globalization advances, people perceive the world as one homogeneous, highly competitive marketplace, i.e. the world is flat. And I think those are good points to try and tease out and say, are those affecting me in the way that I think about whether there are any secrets? And it's not the nicest term, but are there any secrets that
haven't been discovered, essentially?
Yeah, or haven't been really invested in or thought about, or people sort of just like, whatever. Yeah, and that last one as well, especially the flatness, is a dangerous one, because it's, again, leans into that competitive idea.
Yeah. I should say the HP story was quite interesting. Like, I was like, wow, like, you know, to turn from like a pioneer in their field, you know, like printers and whatnot and all the other things are sort of invented, to kind of virtually be non-existent now, you know.
Yeah.
It's like crazy to think that their market value at the moment is way less than when they started off. That's just like scary, you know.
Yeah.
But again, reason being is because the people running it decided against inventing stuff. That's like in a nutshell, you know, because it's like, no, we don't have to look anymore. We need to service things that are already there. And you're like, why? You know?
I think it's a really, like you say, it's a really good point, because in that HP example, to clarify what you were saying now, the board of directors, there was a guy who was like, well, we need to start looking at new things, and we need to start focusing on creating value and stuff like that, and like innovating. And then the board is like, no, that's not our specialty. Our specialty is, we need to focus on just keeping things going. And making just general decisions, like should we do this and should we do that, and like just general day-to-day decisions. And then essentially the point that Thiel and them are making is just to say, if you do that, your business is going to crumble in the long run. And then he shows that by showing how HP's business has just decreased in value over time. I don't know how well they're doing now, but like from going from a massive company to slowly shrinking over time.
I mean, if you really think about it, there was a time when everyone had an HP laptop or something, and now it's like, I don't know, I feel like at some point HP was bigger than Dell.
Yeah, I also feel like it was fairly big, and now it's like...
Now it's like non-existent, because I'm like trying to think, when last did I see a Dell laptop?
Yeah.
No, HP laptop, sorry.
Yeah, it is crazy. Okay, should we look at the foundations chapter?
Yeah.
The Thiel law is quite funny. So apparently Thiel often like talks about this with his friends, that they came up with this law and they call it the Thiel law. He says a startup messed up at its foundation cannot be fixed. Obviously, in summary, foundations are very important.
Yeah.
And so as a founder, you need to try and make sure that you get things right. You can't build on a flawed foundation, as he puts it.
Yeah. I think with that, in this section, the interesting part was the DMV story. And I mean, I live in this country. I'm not from here, but it just kind of reminds me on how people complain about the different departments of the like, I mean, Home Affairs and the Traffic Department. And I felt like it was exactly that by virtue, the owners of these things is the public or the taxpayers, but then when they go to kind of utilize these services to get the worst experience, because there's that one person that can decide whether to give you either the best service or the worst. You know, but like I said, in essence, you're the ones that are supposed to be important in air quotes, but you know, you find someone who deems their job more important than who you are and can either make your experience pleasurable or hell.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember. I know that that's in this chapter, but I'm trying to remember how it ties to the foundations idea.
No, so it's about, remember how it breaks up on how the different aspects of a company per se, where you have, I want to say stakeholders, but yeah, different groups, which is ownership, possession, and control, where the owners are essentially the people that own the companies. Possession is the people that operate the day-to-day running, so your managers and stuff, and then control is usually the board. They make the decision, etc., etc. So essentially, it's then seen as some sort of hierarchy where the owner is the most important, and you know, and then if you look at how governments are structured, taxpayers, because they're the ones that fund the departments and are using that structure of owners.
In a democracy, technically the people are the owners.
The owners, yeah. So, but in reality, they need to utilize this, and you'd think that since you're the owner, you're supposed to get the best treatment. So if you go to a department, the opposite is actually true. You can have good service, but at the same time, you sort of, someone dictates how that experience will be for you, you know. So in essence, like, being an owner in that system kind of is pointless, if you may say.
Yeah,
not pointless, but you expect the owner to be treated well, but in reality, that's not what happens.
But and that's because of, I think he was saying it's because of the alignment issue, right?
Yeah, yes.
So you can't, in a government or in like a big thing like that, it's very difficult to align people towards the same goals. And so you have this sort of disruption in terms of who's doing what and who has control and all of that kind of stuff. But if you set the foundations well, then your alignment can be a lot better,
Yeah.
and then you don't end up in that DMV issue because your
Everyone knows what
they're
need to
doing
do,
exactly. Like you were saying a lot earlier in the conversation, one of the things that Peter Thiel did really well is he gave people specific roles, and he didn't even think that that was something that was going to be as valuable as it was. But it's a lesson that he learned. Like when you want to do something like starting a company, giving people specific roles that aren't competing with each other is really helpful in terms of getting alignment and having people all pushing towards some broader goal. Yeah. Okay. I think another aspect that he said was interesting was in the foundations chapter was the paying yourself. If you,
yes.
basically he's saying, like, if you come across a founder who's paying himself an exorbitant amount of money,
I think he said more than $150,000 a year.
yeah. If you come across someone who's paying themselves an exorbitant amount of money, then they probably aren't in it for the right reasons.
There's a problem, yeah.
And so he's learned to just avoid those kind of founding or those kind of companies with those kind of founders. And then he ties it back to equity in a company and working for a company. So he says often people find equity unattractive. It's not liquid like cash. It's tied to one specific company, and if that company doesn't succeed, it's worthless. Equity is a powerful tool precisely because of these limitations. Anyone who prefers owning a part of the company as opposed to being paid in cash reveals a preference for the long term and a commitment to increasing your company's value in the future. Equity can't create perfect incentives, but it's the best way for a founder to keep everyone in the company broadly aligned. So it's
I should do, but I know it's something that how can I put this? That I always struggle with, but I see he talks about it on how the flip side to that is being transparent about how much equity different people have, because apparently that can be a disaster.
Yeah, he's saying don't be transparent, which is also interesting.
Which is interesting, how, I mean, he talks about how people in the tech industry thrive on transparency and all that, and yet here is like, okay, that's like one time where you don't need to be, which is very interesting, because I know, like, I mean, it's a known fact, whenever you get employed, the one thing in your contract is always never share how much you earn, which is, it's,
yeah, that's in South Africa.
It's very interesting,
But yeah, I think it makes sense. I think both sides of it make sense.
Yeah,
right? Like the transparency with like how much you earn and stuff makes sense because everyone then feels like they're equally treated because they in some sense are equally treated. But then where Peel, I don't know why I keep on saying Peel, where Thiel keeps on looking at is the competition thing. So Thiel says competition's bad, and I think he maybe while he's thinking through these ideas has that in mind as well. Is if you are like comparing whether it's salaries or whether it's equity and those kind of things, if you're comparing those kind of things, you probably aren't doing it in a healthy way, because that doesn't, as long as you, what I like to say to people is, as long as you feel like you are being paid fairly, then don't worry about what other people are being paid. For now, you might be paid a lot less or a lot more, and that might change drastically in the future. But if you're being paid fairly, I think that's what you. If you're being paid more than fairly, then that's great.
Yes.
But it can also be dangerous, because it can also be that you taking all the money and then you're in the CEO position, or the not good CEO position. But if you are being paid fairly, and there's enough money to go around and stuff, then it's fine. Don't worry about the competition side of things. Just focus on doing the stuff that you're doing well. If you focus on the earning money side of things,
then you're there for the wrong reason.
Yeah, and you're probably gonna end up doing worse overall. Yeah. The last comment I have about the founding thing is, I like the way that it ends off the chapter. He ends off the chapter by talking about extending the founding idea. So founding is normally classified as when you start something, when you found it. And he says here, the most valuable kind of company maintains openness to invention that is most characteristic of beginnings. This leads to a second, less obvious understanding of founding. A founding lasts as long as the company is creating new things, and it ends when the creation stops. If you get the founding moment right, you can do more than create a valuable company. You can steer its distant future towards the creation of new things instead of the stewardship of inherited success. You might even extend its founding indefinitely. Yeah, so I like that idea of saying, like, you almost need to keep refounding yourself or your company in order to stay relevant in the market. And then it goes back to that HP example. Like, if you don't push on that innovation and genuinely invest in it, not just like superficially we do innovation and stuff, but if you genuinely push for it and take risks of saying, like, I'm going to try this and it might not work out, then yeah, it's very good. Mechanics of Mafia. Should we go on to that chapter?
Yeah.
Okay, so in a sense, I think this chapter is about company culture. It says the company culture doesn't exist apart from the company. No company has a culture. Every company is a culture. I feel like it's maybe a little bit too technically, like, I still am very comfortable saying, like, that company has a specific culture. But I think I understand what he's getting at.
You all should have seen his reaction. Oh god.
I think he's trying to get at you. It's not like a company is plucked out of the air and put into a company. It just is that way. Like, the company culture just arises out of the natural interactions and way that people deal with things. And I think that's why it's so hard to shape a culture.
Yeah, trying to, like, also process this. I feel like we're just trying to put across is, how can I put this? It's like you said, you cannot come in and sort of shape the company's culture. Sort of the people within the company sort of dictate what the culture is.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it.
Yeah.
And that's why he's so keen on, like, saying hiring is vital.
Yes.
And he says don't outsource hiring because you need the right people.
You need people that are part of the culture to sort of be like, oh, we relate with you and you. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've got more to add, but off. Contact me for more information. But then,
yeah, we can look a little bit more into the mechanics of Mafia section, but effectively it's about saying hire the right people and you will develop that culture.
Yeah.
And he talks about as thinking about why would someone join your company as opposed to joining Google or some other company like that where they can earn a ton more, assuming that they're really like good
Yeah.
engineers or whatever it might be. And so they can join something like Google. Why should they join yours? And those answers are company specific, and it's related to what is your mission and what is your team about.
And if you can't answer that, then yeah.
Yeah, he says a little bit later, like, don't fight the perk war and do all those kinds of things. It's fine to give your company.
Yeah, I think what it's trying to say, don't use the perks as the attracting factor.
Exactly, yeah.
Like, those should sort of be a given.
Not even. Like, I think...
No, he's trying to imply that those are supposed to be there. Like, okay, that's kind of the bare minimum. Not bare minimum, but that's expected. But in addition to the perks, because, you know, at the end of the day, it's like, if people are one up in each other, it's like, it becomes a financial thing. But like it says, like, you have to, like, I'll take it back to the alignment thing. You have to then align with the company's mission for you to do well. So I'm not saying like you being attracted by the perks, etc., is bad. All I'm saying is that shouldn't be what convinces you
to work
for that company primarily.
Yeah. I would go as far as to say that I think he would be fine with saying no perks is all right. Like, I don't think he has it as an expectation. It's a nice thing, but yeah, I wouldn't say that it's an expectation. But I 100% agree with you on, like, and he touches on that to say, if the thing that it makes the final choice is the perks, that person probably isn't the person. Not probably. That person is not the person you should be hiring. If they're like, cool, I'm sold because the perks are great, then you should be like, okay, sorry, we've decided not to hire you. Because then they will just go, if another company offers better perks, they will just jump ship. And that's not helpful. Yeah, it's just...
Like, I mean, in the past, I've always chatted to people when they're in that limbo of trying to move jobs and whatnot. And I always say, if pay is the only reason, then you do not have a good enough reason.
Yeah.
Like,
unless you're really getting paid terribly.
Yes. Unless, you know,
paid sort of reasonable amounts. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a valid reason, but I always think it's always far greater, especially like if you've been there. Okay, if you've been there 6 months, yes. If you've been there 2 years, the chances are you can give a valid argument for them to increase your salary.
Yeah, and unless you can't, maybe look at yourself.
Yes, unless, you know, yeah, like you said. But if that's your only reason after building a relationship with, at the end of the day, they're also human. Like, the human aspect is there. They're not robots and whatnot. That's what I'm saying. If you can give a valid reason to why you should get paid more, because I mean, most people don't even know why they want to get paid more, I believe.
Yeah.
You know, but if you
so
really,
they can buy more stuff.
Yeah, but if you're able to put the point across of why you want to earn more, then fair. But I believe that in most cases not the only reason why people move or should move.
Yeah, not the only reason why people should move. Yeah. The end of the chapter looks at that idea that we've already discussed, do one thing. So getting people to focus on one thing. He says there as a summary point, on the inside, every individual should be sharply distinguished by her work. I think that's the majority of that chapter, the mechanics of mafia. So
it was fairly short. Yeah.
Have a good culture, and the culture is formed by the people. Okay, so if you build it, this is the next chapter. If you build it, will they come? So this goes back to that importance of sales.
Yeah, thing. I think we We spoke about it quite a bit at the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, in summary, it's essentially a lot of people view sales as this artificial, silly nonsense, but actually, sales works. It works on the people who think it's silly nonsense.
Like you, James.
Exactly, yeah. I'm being convinced that it's not. The reason I'm being convinced is because I don't want to fall into this category that he says. He says, yeah, anyone who can't acknowledge that it's like anyone who can't acknowledge the likely effect it has on themselves is doubly deceived. So if you think that advertising doesn't affect you, then you are doubly deceived. So I just want to be once deceived. Yeah, so he says, yeah, most people underrate its importance. And I think that's a good point. And I think part of it is what he touches on later, where he says sales is a hidden thing often, because most products and most ideas, and it's interesting, ideas, not just products, need to be sold.
Yeah.
So I remember listening to a book a while back and being like, oh wow, like, and it's almost a cringy thing to think about, but there's also some helpful aspects to be straightforward and think through it clearly, that you are a product of some sort. Yeah. So if you and you shouldn't, again, go and try and sell yourself and be like a snake oil salesman, but to try and realize that the ideas that shape history and do things are often because of almost eccentric people as well, that are able to capture the imagination of people. So, for example, Elon, he's a really smart guy, and he is also able to capture the imagination of people, which then allows people to, it's almost like you passing on, to use a term that Dawkins would use, it's like the meme idea, where you passing on this thought of like, oh, okay, this thing is possible, or I want to dive into that idea with you. And then you can build up a strong team around you. But if you just like, oh no, I don't care about interacting with people, I'm just going to do my own thing, most likely, like, you're not going to get the traction. Even if you have a brilliant idea, you're not going to get the traction that you think. And he says here, on page 129, academic ideas about history and English don't just sell themselves on their intellectual merits. Even the agenda of fundamental physics and the future path of cancer research are results of persuasion. So to try and be a persuasive person, I think, is not good. But to realize that in order for an idea of yours, if you genuinely think an idea is a valuable and important idea, don't be afraid of trying to convince others that that idea is important and valuable. Don't do it just for the sake of being an impressive person or anything, but realize that you have to be able to sell your ideas. It's funny, even in the world of academics, you think about the proposals that you write to be able to get research funds and things. You can't just write like, this is exactly what I'm going to do, blah, blah, blah. You have to kind of sell it.
Yes.
Which is weird. Like, it's crazy because you're like, no, it should be completely objective. But no, that's not how it works.
Yeah, true.
So I really blabbed on about sales there, which is new for me.
For someone who thinks I've never fallen for the sales trap.
Exactly, yeah. Hopefully I've sold everyone else on it. I probably didn't do a good job because, yeah, selling yourself idea is it is really cringy. So I don't know if you want to look at the how to sell a product section. So on page 130, Superior sales and distributions by itself can create a monopoly, even with no product differentiation. The converse is not true. No matter how strong your product, even if it easily fits into already established habits, and anyone who tries it likes it immediately, it won't sell, or it won't work unless you support it with a strong distribution plan. Which is crazy to think. Like, you can have a brilliant idea and it fails, and someone else can have a very average idea, but they market it really well and do really well. That is the world we live in.
Yeah.
Don't be doubly deceived. So yeah, once it goes back to that starting small. If you start small, then over time you build up, like Jack's Bagels, they built up over time, and then they got some, almost, you can think of it like reference customers. They got some people who liked the product and things like that, and then they realized, okay, we can slowly expand over time, and that's the way to go about it.
I mean, another example would be probably, if you look at franchise, they probably started off as one entity and then grew to the point where instead of just selling whatever product it is that range of shop sells, they're actually selling the shops to people. So I think that scale is exactly what probably is to, if it's just one person, like some simple ads, and then those source people that, or yourself now going to people, approaching people, to be like, okay, this is what I want to sell to you. So yeah,
and it's crazy because like Woolies is like that as well, where the shop is this thing that you like, Woolies. And they've done a really good job. Okay, lastly is selling to non-customers. So you need to sell your product to more than just the customers. You must also sell the company to employees and investors. So, and he says, which is a clever thing, there's the human resources version of the lie that great products sell themselves. And that lie is this company is so good that people will be clamoring to join it. And that's just not true. Unfortunately, you have to sell it. We go on to the next one, man and machine. I think in this chapter, it's essentially saying, there's a summary statement here. The most valuable businesses of the coming decades will be built by entrepreneurs who seek to empower people rather than try to make them obsolete. So rather than sort of building machines to replace humans, building machines to
help.
Yeah.
I think that's concept throughout that chapter. It's just to say, don't look at machines as threats. I mean, there's always that chat of ChatGPT, whether it's going to replace people's jobs and whatnot. I think it might, at first glance, it might seem so, but I think that human aspect is still needed to a great part,
and over time, as it replaces more things, and undoubtedly it will.
But it leaves humans to do things that were better. I mean, the one example, which if you actually think about it, it's like AI systems fail to do what a 4-year-old do. Like, let me rephrase that. Machine learning models fail to do what a 4-year-old can do with 100% certainty. Where it talks about how models can only identify cats with 75%.
They need
accuracy.
Basically much more training data in order to be able to identify cats in an image.
Which, a 4-year-old can do. So it's like, if you think about that, it's like, yes, you can view them as a threat, but for the most part, it's like there's still certain aspects or human interaction that would be needed, for a long time to come.
And I think that's changing over time as well, though. So some of the points that he makes here that I think are even outdated, which is funny.
Yes.
But I think still that's fine because even let's say in a few years' time, and already cats can be identified on a lot less training data. But even if it replaces humans in terms of the amount of exposure that's needed for a model to gain sufficient ability, then there's still gonna be aspects that you can tie human and machine workings
Again,
together.
that's what I'm saying. Like they might eliminate some aspects, but there's still enough, that still needs human integration. I mean, for instance, like something as mundane as connected to a power source. Like, that's something that still needs human interaction.
Except for the, what's it? Roomba or whatever, those vacuum robot
I mean,
things.
it vacuum, but it doesn't plug itself.
It does.
No, but initial setup. They dock themselves, yes. But I mean, connecting them to the power source and setting them up, like connecting them to the network and all that kind of stuff, that still needs some sort of human interaction. Like, they won't. That's what I'm getting at.
At some point it'll change, they'll walk into the door.
Please, let me be in my shell.
I want to be fine.
Let me be in my shell. But on that, there's still some level of human interaction that's still needed.
Yeah.
Is what I'm getting at. Again, like I said, don't treat it completely as a threat, but rather something to make you better.
Yeah. I think it goes back to that definite optimism idea. Like, okay, you can have this vision of like robots taking over and humans having nothing to do and stuff. And I think humans are naturally curious and like to explore things. And potentially you get super AI that is, or super intelligence that is able to do everything that humans can do and better. And I mean, robots, the Boston Dynamics robots and stuff are already really impressive in terms of physically what they can do.
Yeah.
And so those things combining over 10 years, 20 years, it's maybe 30 to 50 years. Doesn't really matter what the time frame is because we can guess and then be wrong and maybe sooner, maybe later. But regardless of what it turns out to be, even if that super intelligence is better than us in every aspect, it's pointless to be like, okay, what's the point of life anymore? And it's you almost need to have that definite optimism that there can be a way for humans and machines to work together for beneficial things. And I guess my semi-contrarian idea is that a lot of people are very pessimistic towards how like machines will take over and what happens when they're more intelligent than us and stuff, and will they squash us because we like ants and things like that. It does make me reflect on when I kill an ant pretty much every time, and there's a lot of ants in the world. But when you think about intelligence, it seems like intelligent systems tend towards the good. And so if we get a super intelligent system, I have high hopes that because of the way that it works, it will be both good and tend towards the truth because of its intelligence. And so whereas often people are worried about like, ChatGPT and fake producing fake this and that and not knowing what's true and not, and all of that kind of stuff. Whereas I tend towards more thinking that the more it starts to learn and improve, the better it will get and the more empathetic it will get. Because it seems to me like the more more something is intelligent, the more empathetic it is. And also the more it tends to be able to evaluate whether something is true or not. because once you get to a certain point, if you understand something well enough, then it's very difficult. And the example that I like to use here is like the flat earth example. There's a lot of people that still believe that the earth is flat, but for the people who have been like, oh, okay, the earth isn't flat because of all of these different aspects, it almost doesn't matter how much someone tries to convince them that it is flat. You have enough information to be able to say, no, like, I know that it's not. I know that 1 + 1 is 2, assuming you're using a base 10 system and a bunch of different things. I know that 1 + 1 is 2. And so you have enough information to be able to, no matter how much sort of rubbish there is, you can say, okay, no, that's actually what I believe to be true. Anyway, yeah. So my semi-contrarian idea, I think a lot of people would still agree with it. So I don't think it's that contrary. At the end of the chapter, they say here, as we find new ways to use computers, they won't just get better at the kinds of things people already do. They'll help us to do what was previously unimaginable. Okay, the last 2 chapters. Seeing green, that's the thing that we were trying to remember.
Yeah.
Okay, so should we look at those questions? Do you want to go through those 7 things quick?
Yeah.
On page, what's it, 154?
It starts on 153.
Okay, cool.
So yeah, I think the first question there is the engineering question.
Maybe let's just say, I'll let you read through them now,
okay.
but it's the 7 questions that every business must answer. Yeah.
Startups.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I just dove in there. But yeah, so the first question is the engineering question. Can you create breakthrough technology instead of incremental improvements? The second is the timing question. Is now the right time to start your particular business? Third is the monopoly question. Are you starting with a big share of a small market? And then the people question. Do you have the right team? Number 5 is the distribution question. Do you have a way to not just create but deliver your product? And then the durability question. Will your market position be defensible 10 and 20 years into the future? And then the secret question, which is, have you identified a unique opportunity that others don't see? So those are the 7 questions.
Yeah, I think a lot of them kind of speak for themselves, and like people would need to sort of read through them again and sort of really think through them and answer them. But I think they're very helpful questions to figure out if you are on the right track. And if you can answer all of them like yes, like we have clear ideas about this and that, then I think you're in a good path. But there are some like caveats to say don't trick yourself. So one of those is for that monopoly question, exaggerating your own uniqueness is one way to botch the monopoly question, is what they say. And we've discussed that quite a bit.
I should say, like, most of these questions actually map onto the chapters, the ideas that have been discussed through the different chapters.
Yeah. I like the timing one as well, because people don't realize how important timing is often.
Yeah.
Like if you think about ideas, even just like general ideas in history, over the last few years, I've realized how important it is for people to be at the right time, at the right place. When they come up with ideas, like Einstein's ideas couldn't have come without the prior stuff. And if you look at the creation of calculus and things like that, like founded by 2 different people at the same time, roughly. And the reason for that is because of a bunch of prior things that almost needed to happen in order for that moment in history to take place. Yeah. There was the, let me see here. So
just before you go, I just want to say that timing question can also answer a question that you had earlier, or something we touched on that. Maybe that's another thing what makes other studying certain restaurants successful or not, because it might just be that at that point in time, let's say you start a soup shop in summer, like there's no way that would be successful, But if you start it in winter and then from you starting that, then ask yourself the durability question, like, okay, you then realize, okay, this cannot be viable in winter. Let me think of what I should make in summer.
Keep founding.
Yeah. So I feel like timing also has
Yeah.
a
That's
big
good.
role in that.
Yeah, then it's the durability thing as well. So that durability question and how every entrepreneur should plan to be the last mover in the particular market. And that starts with asking yourself what would the world look like 10 to 20 years from now, and how will my business plan fit in? So I think that on a smaller scale, that soup example was a good one. And on a longer scale, the HP example is a good one. How do you think about the future? Then there's the distribution one as well, which I liked. It's like a very straightforward comment, but selling and delivering a product is at least as important as the product itself, which is where we failed back in the day. And the phone stand thing is not like it was ever going to be some revolutionary thing, but we could have done a lot better than we did had we been better at sales and distribution. And that's difficult, as we found out.
Yeah, and I think none of us were salespeople.
Yeah, and also none of us were able to mass produce it. Like, we went to a few places to try and figure out the mass production stuff, but like, it's very expensive and it's very time consuming. Obviously it gets easier if you're in a specific industry and you have experience, but yeah, it's not a trivial thing. And then, yeah, great companies have a secret. Towards the end of the chapter, it says there, an entrepreneur can't benefit from the macro scale unless his own plans begin at the micro scale. So again, that's that small startup idea. And then it says on 171, the macro need for energy solutions is still real. Because remember, this whole chapter is framed in the seeing green. So this whole chapter was everyone is thinking it's a gold rush, the solar energy and all green energy stuff. And they ended up basically just competing. A bunch of them ended up competing themselves to their ends, demise. And then the reality is that they're saying the macro need for energy solutions is still real, but a valuable business must start by finding a niche and dominating a small market. Facebook started as a service for just one university campus before it spread to other schools and then the entire world. Paradoxically, the challenge for entrepreneurs who will create the Energy 2.0 revolution, I guess, is to think small. Yeah, thinking small. Okay, then there's the founder's paradox. I don't think we need to dig into that too much. It's essentially, they say the chapter is about why it's more powerful, but at the same time more dangerous for a company to be led by a distinctive individual rather than an interchangeable manager. And then it just talks about the distribution of traits. So if you picture a normal distribution, then often like your average person is going to fall within the middle of weak, poor, disagreeable, infamous, villain, those kinds of traits, and strong, charismatic, insider, rich, hero, famous. So those are the two extremes, and most people fall somewhere in the middle. Not super poor, not super rich. Although, yeah, I mean, it's arguable because I think there's a lot of people that are very poor. But stick with the general thought. So most people aren't super dumb, but also most people aren't super smart, etc. And what happens is with founders, what he calls the founder's paradox is that founders are often on an inverse normal distribution. So they are paradoxically often both very dumb and very smart, and very poor and very rich. Because the poor rich example is because founders, they're rich because they have these very that's true, I guess, but rich in the sense that they own this massive company, but poor in the sense that they don't actually have the cash.
That's what I'm saying. They're rich and they have the idea to get the business running, but don't have the money to back it.
Yeah, but also even if you've got a successful business, it's like you have all of this money. Like Elon, he's the richest, one of the richest people in the world, if not the richest, but he doesn't actually have the money. Like he has to sell shares in order to get that money. It's not real physical cash. And there's lots of these weird paradoxes, being both very agreeable and charismatic, but also being very disagreeable. And most people kind of fall in between, but founders often fall on the extremes. He goes through a bunch of different founders and things. He ends off there. Founders are important not because they are the ones whose work has value, but rather because a great founder can bring the best work out of everybody at his company. And then I like this thing as well. It's the last part of that founders chapter. To believe in yourself, to believe yourself invested with divine sufficiency is not the mark of a strong individual, but a person who has mistaken the crowd's worship for jeering for some form of truth. The single greatest danger for a founder is to become so certain of his own myth that he loses his mind. And then this is the interesting part. But an equally insidious danger is for every business to lose all sense of myth and mistake disenchantment for wisdom. So the reason why I like that is because what it's saying is mistaking disenchantment for wisdom. So we can think we're being so rational about the way that we do things and approach things that we actually lose that sense of definite optimism. But and that's the very dangerous position to be in, because if we don't have that belief, like, okay, we can actually do this crazy thing, like that sort of idea that this myth might actually be real, then we might mistake disenchantment for wisdom. Okay, I don't know if you want to add anything there for the founders thing, but
no, I think I barely got to that chapter. I just started it, but yeah.
So then we can do the last chapter, which is stagnation or singularity. And the chapter basically is looking at the different points that a philosopher, Nick Bostrom, describes, which there's 4 possible patterns for humanity's future. So and they give nice little graphs here. But the 4 different ones are recurrent collapse. So basically the idea of things doing well and then failing. And then things doing well and then failing. So you can almost think about it as like prosperity and war, or creation and then losing all of that. Like what knowledge the Egyptians and stuff had is somewhat lost to us, and all of this kind of thing. And that's the recurrent collapse idea. So you can think of it almost like, for those of you who did physics and maths and that, you can think of it like a sine wave. Yeah. Up and down, up and down. Then that's the first one. Alternative is plateau, then, which is basically we keep on getting better and better and then just sort of taper off, and then it's just like everything carries on the same. Then the third one is extinction. So keep on getting better and better. It's kind of like this exponentially getting better, and then all of a sudden, bam, everything is gone because we kill ourselves. And then the fourth is just takeoff, which basically like similar to the extinction graph, but it's without the extinction part. So he discusses those different ones, and he says, look, recurrent collapse is unlikely because there's so much knowledge and it's so globally distributed that it's unlikely that we will lose that knowledge. So that for that reason, most likely the recurrent collapse is not going to happen. plateau is possible, but also unlikely, just because of technology and all of that kind of stuff and increasing. But he says here, when you add competition to consume scarce resources, it's hard to see how a global plateau could last indefinitely. Without new technology to relieve competitive pressures, stagnation is likely to erupt into conflict. In the case of conflict on a global scale, stagnation collapses into extinction. So he basically is saying that plateau is unlikely because of technology and competition. And if technology doesn't improve things and basically people have to fight it out, that leads to extinction. So plateau is unlikely. Extinction is possible. But he says there that the fourth scenario that's left is the one in which we create new technology to make a much better future. So that's Thiel's belief in new technology being a very powerful source of prosperity, I guess.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think it makes sense. So he ends off there in this chapter saying, our task today is to find singular ways to create new things that will make the future not just different, but better, to go from 0 to 1.
Cool.
Yeah. I don't know if you have any closing thoughts, Peter.
No, just the importance of creation, I think, and I think how to view competition differently, and I think it's changed my definition of monopoly. I think we spoke about this briefly on how monopoly is always seen as bad, but he kind of describe if it's a monopoly that's outright buying out company to be the only people in the on the market, then yes, that's terrible. But monopoly in the sense of from the start you create something that's unique and new and kind of better some sort of area. I think, yeah, it's a good thing, and I think we should all strive to create. I think, I think we all should have that creative side. I think it's a very sort of side to have.
Yeah, I think for me as well, it's changed the way that I think about Monopoly, and it's changed the way that I think about a few different things. The importance of trying to pursue something specifically rather than just diversely doing lots of things.
Everything, yeah.
Not that I think that doing the diverse thing is terrible. It's just you will most likely make more progress pursuing something specific. And then also the way that founding can be seen as a singular event, but it almost a nicer way, at least I think, is that second way of viewing founding, where it's about continuously creating new things and continuously being innovative and not falling into that HP trap, which hopefully HP makes its way out of. And yeah, so if we think like that, then I think we will be able to be a lot more creative, and we'll push and we'll have that definite optimism, despite the fact that there are issues in the world and things. If we don't have that definite optimism and we don't just push for it and act as if it really can be done, whatever that is, then we won't actually make it a reality. Whereas if we do push ourselves beyond, if we almost believe a little bit in that myth, then we will be able to create things that are much more incredible than we thought was possible. And so it's shifted that perception of incremental progress as the only possible solution, which I think is really powerful. And I think incremental progress is still really good, and I think it's something to continuously strive on, looking to that atomic habits thing as well, of saying like make small improvements every day. But that 0 to 1 idea is a really, really helpful, and I think it's a really powerful idea. Yeah. So it's been a really good book.
Yeah.
Highly recommend. Yeah. Cool.
Thanks, James.
Thanks, Peter.
You'll be a married man on our next one.
Yeah. Crazy. Exciting times.
Cool.
Look forward to it.
Cool.
Cheers.
Cheers. Thanks.